People always asking me all these damn questions, and they so confused. I don't know what to tell them. Why he do this? Why he do that? How you do this? How you do that? Hell yeah, I'm trying to do what I want, and I get good grades. That's why I wear these hats with A's. These people recognize that's why they stay up in my face. Cause people always ask me all these damn questions. People always ask all these damn questions.
Hey, all right, man. Welcome back to Objectively Aggressive presents the podcast series, the Lighthouse series. Hey, man, it's been a while.
Sure.
Yeah, ready to get this thing back cracking for a lot of different reasons. It's good to see you. How you been?
I'm up, man. Good to be seen.
That's good, man. I'm glad to be back doing this with you, and knowing that we always love doing it, and knowing that we're doing it for a bigger reason now. And we'll get more into that. So I've been, in the academic world and in the personal world, and kind of got off my little world tour, after my birthday, and settled some stuff down. So, doing the school thing, I appreciate you helping me with that, the mentorship, the supervising for this podcast and things of that nature. So, what you feel we I know and I know you're excited, but how you feel about what we're gonna get into?
Oh man, it's just it's a timely subject, man. It's I think that when we start talking about lessons, man, I always feel like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And sometimes there's lessons that you may think you're ready for, but ultimately you are your own teacher. And
that's powerful. That's Go ahead.
But because you are your own teacher, all you are going to do is rearrange your own understanding to comprehend larger than yourself. And I think no one can do that for you.
Okay.
Like, no one can go inside your mind and rearrange your thoughts in a way to make them make sense to you. But we can give you tools that, if you know how to use them, that will be beneficial. And I think that's our usually our goal is to not teach people what to think. Our goal is to give tools that, if you want to use them, go ahead. If you don't, so be it.
Hey, I like that. And that's what the Lighthouse series is. A guide and a warning, either or, both. And we're going to unpack power. Yep. And I know we've been talking about power. We've talked about power in a couple of different ways, but we're bringing it back to unleash a different way of, looking at things, right? So we want to give some foundation to what you're bringing, I'm bringing, with salt and riot. And so when we're talking about power, we're going to give a sweet serenade to power. So let's start with the foundation. Power is what? What is power? What are we talking about? Are we talking about energy? Are we talking about the authority to do? Are we talking about external? Are we talking about authentic? Where does all this come from? What are we doing?
Man, you know what? The word is interesting because it can be defined so many different ways. There is a definition that I like to use because I think it encompasses all of those ideas you mentioned and goes a little further. So this definition comes from Dr. Wade Nobles, and he says that power is the ability to define reality. So that's part of it. It's the ability to define reality and to have other people respond to your definition as if it were their own. And that's important to me because, first off, I was never taught how to define my own reality. No one ever taught me the tools to define my reality because I was just taught to live in the current reality. Not that I could define what I think reality is. And that is what power becomes. It's the ability to define, and that starts with definitions. And it also starts with this idea that if you use my definition, then you can't argue with me if I taught you what you know.
Well, let's get into this. So let's get into cause and effect, right? So we're talking about power, and it sounds like you would have the power to manipulate someone's reality, right? So you take what would be a delusion, right, for someone, and you make it an actual illusion to someone. If you get them to play into it, it's like, hey, this is how it goes. And we found that sometimes, there's a difference between truth and fact. And what ends up happening, repetition ends up being what people remember more than truth or fact. So all you got to do is tell somebody something a couple of times for them to remember it. And if they have no belief of it, it becomes true for them. So their power is just built from an ignorance on up, if I may.
Yeah, and I want to take that word manipulation and unpack it a little bit.
Okay.
Because there's two ways you can use manipulation, in the sense that to manipulate something means to use it skillfully, to be clever, to be, and I think that we use the word sometimes with a negative connotation as if manipulation is bad. And I think that when it comes to this definition of power, the idea is that I can only have power if you give it. You have to give it, or more importantly, you have to want my definition. See, if you don't want my definition or the definitions we are sharing, then you don't have to accept the definition. You can define power how you want to define it. But I would just argue that the expansiveness of the word will only be limited to your own comprehension of it.
Yeah, so that's good, right? Because that's what this is about, objectively aggressive, but OA, meaning objectively everything for me.
Yeah.
Right? That OA, or anything, we'll say objectively anything, because manipulation, you can make a tool, you can make a weapon, right? But when we talk about power, I would like to think about it from two different ways.
Yeah.
It's like your inherited power, right? And then there's this cause and effect type of event. So some sort of, we'll say, penetrating event that could cause power.
Yes.
Right? So which one comes first, right? Is it inherited power? Is it the penetrating event? Right? Like, how does one gain power? Like, we're talking about power. We're talking about being able to have spiritual powers.
Yeah. Well, so I'm not going to differentiate the word for the purpose of agenda. What I would say is this. What I'd say is that the expansiveness of the power that we're talking about can only be harnessed, because think about this. If I have an electrical outlet and I plug the wrong voltage into that outlet, it could cause a fire. So I need a conduit to harness that power, which is why the power starts with here. See, the limitation that we have is our own imagination or creation of the idea. So we can inhibit the power by not understanding how to use said power. So, for example, if I were to tell somebody that who wrote the Webster's dictionary? Who wrote Webster's dictionary? Well, like, we didn't write it.
I would say Webster.
So okay, so let's say if Webster wrote it, but let's say we disagree with Webster's ideas.
Right.
Let's say that I disagree with Webster. Well, who are you to disagree with Webster? Because you got to be humble. Because see, humility is what they tell you to do. You do not access your full power. Because I can say I disagree with Webster. And I could say that not only do I disagree with him, I would say I want to expand or fill in the gaps because I don't think that this word is being used correctly. So now I can challenge that word. And then what do is I define my reality. And then what I have to do is, so that I'm not insane, I have to now share my reality with other people.
Well, I'm glad that you talk about definitions, because we recently were talking about definitions and we agreed on a new definition, and we were talking about terror.
Terror.
And we were talking about what terror means, and I gave you what my definition was, and you agreed with it. And that's what we talk about, being able to gain power. So that's power. Yes. I gave you a definition and you believed it.
Yes. Right? And when you gave me the definition, I asked for clarification.
Correct.
And then when you clarified it, we made agreement. And I said, you know what? This is a word that can be more expansive, because when we start to expand definitions, what we also have to do is we have to be mindful of what comes with that expansion, because a lot of times definitions are narrow in order so that we don't think outside of the box. And then everybody says, you know, you got to think outside the box, but I would submit you have to think inside of the box first. Okay. And then go out the box. And so the question then becomes is, I don't think that your definition I do not think that the previous definition of terror was sufficient. If I thought the previous definition of terror was sufficient, then I would think there was no need to change the definition or expand upon it. And unfortunately, in this culture, we live in a world where we have not been able to define our own reality here, because others have done it for us. And that is problematic.
I would agree. And so to fill in the suspense of what the definition of terror was agreed upon, I think I wrote it down, but if to paraphrase it again, terror, the definition of terror was the threat of force or grievous bodily harm, some sort of threat to affect emotional decision making. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about that to go into the terror management theory, because that's been recently a hot topic of ours.
Yeah.
And I find that theory very interesting, because I feel like I'm building a love theory. And so I find that it comes down to two things. So when it comes down to power, I feel like it comes down to a love and fear thing, because you can create leverage and submission. Right. And there has to be rationale for submission through logic. Yes. And I think you have to have power from that. And again, I always say the highest form of power, in my opinion, I find, is information.
Yeah. And it goes back to something that Machiavelli said. He said, is it better to be loved or is it better to be feared? And he argued that if he had to pick, he said, I would rather be feared than loved. And I think that when you start to look at the reason or the rationale that he would rather be feared, is because he said that people can take advantage of your love. People can use your love in a manipulative way where you did not intend it. And you can now not understand that it's the fear or the terror that has been the most effective tool for power as we've seen it. Not saying that it is the best tool, it has been the most effective tool, because if I can make you afraid, to your point, I can stop your rationale, your emotional, and I can now create an environment where you become tunnel vision, myopic, and now you do not look at all the options or the parameters.
It sounds like mental model myopia to me.
Yeah.
Right. For a lot of different reasons. And so when, I recently put a poll up talking about quote unquote spanking, and I put the quotes around spanking because we all know some of us didn't just get spanked. Right.
Yeah.
But
some of us were terrorized.
Right. Some people actually were terrorized.
Yes.
And I appreciate everyone who went up there and was bold enough to put their truth and what they feel like happened to them. Right. Because I think it's important in understanding development.
Yes.
Right. There are some people, I think, now in starting to get into, ethics and ethnic groups. Right. Yes. When it comes to, and your dissertation was about this, what is the communication from parents to children about how to deal with power and how to not get eliminated by power.
Yeah, and that opens up a question that we were taught in fear. We were taught to be fearful, and most of the intergenerational issues that we look at originated from the plantation to fear, that do not embrace your power because you have to essentially survive in a world where you have no power. Your power is gifted to you or granted to you at the benevolence of another people. So if somebody says, we all heard the slogan white power. So what you're saying to me, if I use my definition, is that white people have the ability to define reality and have other people respond to their definition as their own. If I said black power, then black people have the ability to define reality. So wait a minute. My definition of power don't need color, don't need black or white, because what we've seen is that I get power by dividing people, because all of the people will not agree with my definition. But if I get more people to agree with me than agree with you, and if we are willing to do violence, then we can eliminate, we can go to war. And if I'm skillful, then I understand that I will go to war, but I need a rationale that will make people want to die for. And this is what the idea to me of power is that when we say God is all what? Powerful. And the reason that that's important to conceptualize is because we have this understanding that no one person can have all this power.
No one man can have all that power.
And so since no one can have all that power, we have to understand we have to have an entity, some would call it a deity, that we use their power on our behalf. So it's a conduit, because you can't handle 2,000 volts of electricity. You'll kill you.
Correct.
But if my conduit can give me 100 volts at a time, I can sustain. And what I've seen happening is they get the most power. This is why I see happening when it comes to religious organizations, and that these individuals are together for power. It's for power. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that power is coercive. I'm saying that it's power, that a gang gets together for the same reason that the church gets together.
So that's funny you say that, because I recently just had a conversation with a friend of mine who was in a legal situation, old friend, right? I got friends in low places. So, he was talking about how the church was looking out for him. I was like, you need to be in that church, doing something, because right now for your situation, they're going to be the ones to vouch for you the most and the best, and with their community, connection, that could help him boost him in the community based on where he is, right? But confident opinion, no cap here, right? There's two types of power that I find, and it could be more, and we can base it on information, but based on my information is external power and authentic power based on what we talk about with God and so what I find, right? Because the external power comes from the things that we can touch, right? Like it's the five senses, and it feeds the personality. And when you talk about God, regardless of what that is, there would be a conversation about the soul. And so I like to be able to differentiate between the soul experience, which is not just about the personality. It's about the total experience and feeling people. It's that energy again. It's having the power to feel a situation, almost, the emotional intelligence, and having the IQ enough to impart your knowledge of self and people, right? And be, here we go with Riot, reverent, intentional, objective, and together in this thing called love instead of fear. And so I think being able to separate those two and kind of draw a line in the sand and say, hey, which one are you is important.
And so I like to think that the whole is more powerful than the parts. The circle is more powerful if it is connected than it is dissected. If I take a circle and cut it in half, then I have two crescents, right? Okay. When I put it together, it's going to be the most powerful. Right. So any division of power to me only weakens it. Like if I add an adjective before the word justice,
social justice.
See, but isn't justice more powerful by itself?
It is.
So let's not dissect it unless we need to. And the only time I would dissect it is if I'm trying to make agreement with somebody who wants to dissect it.
I would agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Could I take this further and say that if I were to take your same concept, I would say that external power comes from authentic power, because authentic power is the whole set of power, like you're saying.
Yeah. And now that we can condense, it's like if I have a concentrated source, the only way you can have some is if I dilute it. If it's concentrated, I have a concentrated source, I will dilute it. I don't want to dilute the idea of power because I believe that those who have power don't dilute it.
They don't. And they use it however it needs to be. So ethics serve power. Morality serve power. Because if you have power, you can determine what is ethical or what is moral. Oh.
And so they underpinned it.
That's a great segue. You know that? That is a great segue to something I want to talk about real quick. The 2021 apology. Right? When you, we're just going to keep it there, right?
Yeah.
When you can shape how people are looked at up here.
Yeah.
That's one of the most powerful things to be able to do.
Yes.
And so that's why I think that apology is so important, to understanding that no one truly knows the ultimate power to which a certain group has, because it's been dullened for pretty much the whole medical experience of understanding psychiatry and psychology.
Yeah. And it's important when you talk about power. It's like when I tell people all the time, it's like, do you know why God has to be invisible?
Yeah, we talked about that.
Because if he was visible, he could be attacked. You cannot attack an idea unless you have a more powerful idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to ideas, how do we get ideas? Is that we get ideas when we see the utility of it. Meaning like, hey, you gave me a tool to do something with it. I don't find that tool effective anymore. So for example, let's say you gave me some religion. And in that religion, you said I was a slave and you are my master. That's going to be problematic for me getting power over you. It's going to be problematic because now if you tell me that I only am going to get power by serving you, meaning if I'm obedient to you, I have power. See that, or that I'm going to get some power later on, just in the afterlife or something like that. That is just convenient for you to keep power now. And so what I don't like is I don't like this idea that when people try to tell me one definition of power that they don't agree with for themselves. Like, don't tell me one definition that you use that you want me to follow, but then you follow a whole nother definition. Don't like that. So let's be consistent. And so when it comes to the idea of the apology from the APA, the American Psychological Association, what I didn't realize initially is that there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. See, when it's the time when an idea is ready, nothing can stop it. Nothing can hinder it. It is the immovable force. unstoppable object. It's all of those things. And so there is ideas that have not been challenged in this history, in this country's history. There are ideas that are now being challenged because we now have the resources, not money, because great ideas cost nothing. We have the resources to challenge them, and we can do it in a way that will expose things that we were never supposed to know. Like, I wasn't supposed to know how you use theory against me. I wasn't supposed to know that.
Okay.
Wasn't supposed to. But now we do know how theory is used to create frameworks, to say, you know what? My thinking is inadequate for this problem. Let me see how somebody else looks at this issue. Let me adopt their framework, their lens. Let me put their glasses on and say, you know what? I'm going to use Dr. Wade's noble definition of power because my definition has been limited. So I need his framework of power. And now let's say, now it's not the end all be all, because to your point, the difference can be is that if somebody comes along with a better definition of power, I'm not married to that definition.
That's that, and you have the ability to evolve and adjust anytime you want. I think it's important to understand power from the perception individually, because I think it builds and molds everything you see, right? The mental model. So when you're a baby, you see that your parents have a certain type of power and you think they're superheroes, right? Up until a certain point. But what's happening at this time is that based on the normal rearing of a child, you get frameworks from both your parents.
Yes.
And then so depending on their framework, that's going to be implemented in you. And then from then on, unless you decide to challenge that framework later,
implement it or reject it.
Right. But I mean, yeah, right. But if you reject it at a certain age, there's going to be consequences for that. Right. So
that's fair.
We're going to assume acceptance until the teenage years, when rebellion generally rears its head.
Yes.
With that, you accept your parents' framework until you see something more powerful.
Yeah.
Or you're willing to,
more effective.
More effective, and I would say more powerful in the fact that it grabs your attention enough to question the other framework.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so framework is really the power, because from what I would find, right, you have to have certain information, because even if you try to give a situation of caveman, somebody found something, come over here. That's a complete involvement or isolation of information. But since it was better to have 2 people to 3 people to take out animals to eat, it made sense to let people know about that information, unless you had a tool to take out that animal by yourself and then keep it by yourself. But then you would have to kill it, clean it, and then so it just made sense to have a team.
Yes.
Right. So these things about what we see in the world is like the benefit ends up coming because it's more beneficial to involve people, because it's hard to do it by yourself. Because the thought would be, if people had the power to do it by themselves, would they? Now,
but that raises a question about collective power. Is this concept that if my reality that I have created for myself is not realistic, or if it's not pragmatic, or if it's too idealistic, then people will not be able to respond to my definition as if it were their own. So what I find most effective to power is to, before I tell you what I think, I want to know what you think.
Oh, well, that's power in itself.
Well, no, but because before I tell you what I think, I want to know what you think. Now, the reason I want to know what you think is because I am more willing to be flexible with other thoughts that are not my own than most people.
And same here.
That elasticity or flexibility will say, you know what? tell me what you think love is. And then I'd say, you know what, that's a great definition. Or I would say that can that be applied to other areas beside what you're talking about? And so we want an expansive idea, but then we want to conceptualize it. And how can I make this practical? And so when you say framework, I would say that the idea is that I can only look through one lens at a time correctly.
Right.
Correctly. Now, the quicker I can change to accept ideas that I don't necessarily support, the more effective I can have a dialogue with somebody to understand where they're coming from, meaning how you see the world, the phenomenology, how you look at things, how you reason, how you create meaning. And then what I find is that we're not as different as people like to think, because we're very similar when it comes to the things that we're all deciding or we want to do.
I would say that gets me back to the original thought, the idea, right? Idea equals theory.
Yeah.
Right. So if we're talking frameworks, what's the difference between theoretical and conceptual?
You know, and that's a good question, because a lot of times when we talk about theoretical, what we're seeing is an overarching, meaning I can take the theoretical and then add concepts to it. So I can take theoretical framework. I'll use example. Critical race theory is a framework. It's a framework to view things, right? Now, what some people have done is they've taken that framework and they have conceptualized compartments of it, meaning that they'll say whiteness is property, meaning that because I am white in America, I have a value because I am white here.
Right.
And so I've conceptualized, and now I've created theory or that it's like a parent and a child. Theoretical is the parent. It's mama. And then the child comes from the problems that you didn't see when you were theorizing. So I love James Baldwin, one of my favorites of all time, right? But James Baldwin ain't alive today.
Right.
He ain't here. So what I can do is I can conceptualize his arguments to today's problems. If he's not here, but I can use what he said in his theoretical framework to conceptualize the reality that we're seeing today. And most people can't do that because they don't understand that in order for me to conceptualize what he is saying, I have to have an intimate familiarity with what his arguments were. I have to have an argument and I have to know it. So when people say like, well, you've heard this saying, what would Malcolm X say if he was alive today? And I'm like, first off, I'm not interested in the perspective of dead people because Malcolm ain't dead, because his ideas are still here.
Right.
They're still here. And if the idea is still here, the body that holds the idea can go. Because people are still using arguments from John C. Calhoun, the slave owner who died in the 1840s. They still use his arguments today. And he's been dead for over 160 some years. And so if you can use his arguments, I can use it from 60 years ago. And that is how you conceptualize things. But one of the challenges is that I cannot conceptualize somebody's framework if I have my own biases that will not allow me to see beyond what I expect or assume to happen because of it.
Okay. So that sounds like you're giving a shout out to objectivity. I like
yes.
it. I like
yes.
it. So
yeah. And I'll give you one quick example. Like in the 60s, there was a civil rights movement. Right?
Okay.
Now, my question that I ask people is, why were we fighting for civil rights if we were citizens? Because if I'm a citizen, I have the right to vote. I can sit at a lunch table. What were we fighting for? So I'm going to conceptualize that we weren't fighting for civil rights. It wasn't the civil rights movement. That's not what it was. A rebellion. It was a rebellion. And since I see it as a rebellion, I'm conceptualizing. Now, I wasn't there in the 60s, but I know that citizens can do things. I don't have to go march to get for voting. I don't have to have dogs sicked on me and churches bombed and blowing up. Terrorism was happening to us. And citizens don't get terrorized in their own country.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't have been a citizen. Now, on paper, you said I was a citizen. But once again, I'm going to now define my own reality. And I'm going to reject the notion that you told me I was a citizen. I reject that. If anything, I was a second-class citizen, wasn't first. So now, since I reject that, now I will share that with other people and say, you know what? Why were we? And now when I present that information to somebody, they have a choice to make. They can say, you know what? We were really citizens. We just had some struggles. Well, that's how you want to conceptualize it. That's fine. But to me, that's too narrow, because now I have to explain why these little kids were getting bombed in their churches. Now I have to explain to people why a million people had to go march on Washington for jobs and opportunities if we were citizens.
Which is important to the total concept of power, in my opinion, as I try to place it all together, because I like how we talked parent and child with theoretical and conceptual.
Yes.
Right. Because I like in this beginning, it goes back to the law of hereditary and the law of cause and effect. For me, it's like, where do you get it from? You get it from your parents, and things happen. This is how you change the way you do things and the way you think about things. But I think it's important that we know the difference of that, because the idea of self comes from your parents, who are, quote unquote, your on earth gods.
Yep.
Right.
If they didn't tell you no different, you wouldn't know no different.
Okay. And that's
they are your creator.
Okay. So let's get into that. So let's get into that. Cocky explanation.
Hey, you take that charge, bro. I like where you going. Go ahead.
Okay. And you just, check me off.
Yeah.
Right. So when it comes to the experience of self, you get your concepts, your theoretical concepts from your parents, but your parents got it from their parents, and it's based on the environment that you're in. And so my cocky explanation would be, we're talking about mental model myopia. Mental model myopia would come through the fact that if you've never challenged a thought and you just took it as is, and the powers that be always wanted to make sure that they kept the power.
Yes.
And you played a game of telephone.
Yes.
Right. But you have two different theoretical concepts going on for ethnic groups and racial groups, and how to survive and even make it to the next day. Right. So the explanation that's cocky right now would be that if you've never challenged your own theoretical framework,
yes,
you find yourself at a disadvantage, because you will be limiting yourself to the thoughts of your parents, who could have had mental model myopia and probably did, based on a situation of fear and power, leverage and submission.
Yeah.
Go.
And no one can live in theory. We don't live in theory, because if we only lived in theory, then we would not have a way to deal with the world, because our theories sometimes don't. Our theories explain what is happening, but they should not be used in order to. That's why conceptualization is so important, because if we only are theorizing, then we are just going to be assessing without applying.
That's dope. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, and so when we talk about applying, now we're saying praxis, meaning how do I take the theory and then bring it into reality, which, going back to definitions. Now, the idea of deity, a deification, is, me, my definition of God is gaining one's understanding. Meaning that to me, God can only be as broad or as narrow as I conceptualize, not theorize, as I conceptualize God to be. So, for example, when somebody says God is all powerful, God is all knowing, God is about, fill in those blanks, right? Then my question then becomes, is that if God is these things, it can't be me, because I am not all knowing. I am not all powerful. So therefore, I have excluded myself from the debate by my own definition.
Okay.
But let's redefine it now. I'm going to say the word God is gaining my own definition. So as I grow, the idea of God grows within me. And then it is shared with others, because no two people have the same concept of what God is. No two people, it's like a fingerprint.
Right.
Because if I'm made in the image, now we go to the Hebrew, the word image, and you were created in God's image and likeness, like your parents. But there is no Hebrew word for image. If you go to the Hebrew, it's meaning you were made in the shadow. That's what the word is used. The expression is that I am in the shadow of God.
Okay.
Meaning you can only see a shadow if there's what? Light.
Sun, the light.
In darkness, there is no shadows.
Mm.
So therefore, light becomes how I see the shadow or the reflection in a mirror. Now, this is ultimately going back to Genesis, and he says that in the beginning. Now, I don't like the word God personally because it's confusing. To me, saying God is like saying cereal. Which brand of cereal are you talking about?
Right.
There's many cereals.
Right.
So in the Hebrew, the word is Elohim.
Elohim.
Now, Elohim is plural. It's not singular. So when it said, let us make man in our image, it didn't say, let me make man in my. So God conceptualized cannot be one person. That's why I have male, woman, man, make, child, right? Two become one. That's a conception. I've conceptualized it from theory to concept. So when two creates one, now those two people create Elohim. Elohim is the two becoming one. Mm-hmm. Now we can make our. We have conceptualized Elohim to be something that is spiritual and not physical. So, for example, if I have a definition of power that only I use, I need someone to create Elohim. So now we can have the definition in our image. Me and you can have an image of God that nobody else has in the whole world, and nobody can come between it. Nobody in the world come between it, because it's our definition. And now let's say we want to invite other people into the Elohim. Well, guess what? You can only come if you want to be here.
Right.
You don't make somebody enter into the definition. They are persuaded because it has more utility than their current definition. So, for example, you were talking about ethical exhaustion. You're talking about these questions and these concerns. What I see happening is that it's easier for me to accept your idea than it is for me to create my own. It's easier for me to accept your idea or your definition than to create my own. Because this goes back to Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And so I don't want the responsibility of determining what it is or what it does not mean to define my own self, to talk about meaning and purpose. I don't want to be responsible for that. I want a third party to come in, mom, dad, tell me why I'm here. Right. I told my daughter, I said, look, there are certain questions in life that only you can answer for yourself. Yeah. Hey, I said, there are some questions in life that I cannot, as your parent, give you an answer for.
That's funny. Like you got to let them know.
And so when I talk about the idea of Elohim and the idea of two becoming one, this is the was it e pluribus unum? Out of many, there is one. Because if everybody just walked around with their own definitions in their head, there'd be confusion.
So what you just said, that's on the dollar bill, isn't it?
That's the I think it's the motto. E pluribus unum. I think it's the motto for America. It's the motto. The motto.
Oh, something. It should be on the.
It might be. I think it's New Oral Seclora. There's some statements on there. But when you start to talk about the idea of out of many, there becomes one, because if the many can't all speak at the same time, sometimes we need a representative to take our request. And so when we start to look at the committee, the necessity, it's the necessity that is creating uniformity of definition. Because like I said, if to me up means down and to you down means up, when I say it's going down, you might look up. So we need unification of ideas so that we can now create. That's why, when I talk about PET, punctual equilibrium, if we change things too quickly, too soon, we will lose balance.
It'll be unstable.
Homeostasis.
Right.
And so I can't just go in and just change all definitions you ever heard of in your life. No, can't do that.
Well, so I think that's why when you just said what we were talking about Elohim and we're talking about God, and God is gaining one's definition.
Yes.
And then I like to put something next to that too. I like to do God versus dog, right?
Okay.
Defining one's God.
Yeah, but I think that
hear me out with that. Because I think what we end up doing with that particular thought, right, is we tend to try to define other people's gods for them.
Yeah.
Which becomes the biggest issue, right? Because you say, hey, if you don't do this, it's going down. Right. Yeah. And it's like that's the problem, because when you're to understand who God is, you would have to understand yourself. But if somebody is coming through and saying, hey, no, this is your God and you need to do this, it actually robs you of your own experience.
Yeah. And that's why I ask people all the time, I said, did God make man or did man make God? Because if you conceptualize God, if your understanding of God only comes from a book or from something that was written to you, then I would submit to you that your definition is limited. Because I talk to people who don't believe in God or deity as we currently conceptualize it.
Right.
So when I say that the idea of what becomes your God is what you, like I tell people, to me, the word God and the word guide are interchangeable. What is orienting your life? What is the compass that you follow for truth? If for some people it's science and logic and reason is their God. Some people it's their belly, their appetites. When I'm hungry, I eat. Some people, their God can be a tree. It could be in India, it could be a cow who you believe is the spirit of your ancestors. So I don't get into the idea of what it is to someone. All I know is that there is something that's guiding you. Something is guiding you by your definition. Or it may not even be your definition.
Guiding one's direction.
Well, and the reason I say guiding is because I said gaining one's definition, because there comes a point in our life where we can't ask somebody where to go.
Yeah, you're right.
But when does that take place? When are you able to determine where you should go for yourself?
Well, funny you say that, because I've conceptualized the thought of how you could break that down with salt. And so as we talk about some of the things that I've recognized, that regardless of what we're saying, I found a way. I think that the best way to find God is within yourself, and you can point it to Jesus. You can point it every which way, but you got to go within yourself and find him outside of the book.
Yeah.
You can believe it.
Yeah.
And ain't nothing wrong with that. Right.
But I think the reason that the book is so important for people is because the book provides definitions.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But but the limitation for information comes, and we'll say, just like what my PhD is going, right? Quantitative and qualitative.
Yes.
Right. And so when you're limiting yourself to just scripture, I think you're pigeonholing yourself to a situation, because you will take scripture and you can take an experience and you'll tie it to scripture, but scripture could be pigeonholed based on who and all those different things. Well, that's what I'm saying. So when you find God for yourself, you're able to talk about how the energy of God moves, and which is what people like to correspond with the Holy Spirit types.
Yeah. But I would push back a little bit when you said find God.
Well, yeah, okay.
I don't think God is lost, personally. I mean, I'm conceptualizing. I don't think that God is being found anywhere, because it's being defaulted. It's the default position. And I think that the default position sometimes creates this idea that I only know, to your point earlier, is that I have the God of my parents. Mm-hmm. I was born in this country. In this country, our gods are fill in blank.
Right.
It's not until I say, you know what, Big Mama, the God that you have been serving for all these time, and I see what they have produced for you, and that ain't what I want.
Yeah, not at all.
Like, hey, we've been doing 400 years of praying, and I'm saying, look, I said there is a reason that that, especially now, and I would say this about Black people in America traditionally, is that historically we're the only people who not had a guy who looked like us. Like there's a reason that Thor looks Icelandic, Scandinavian, because he looks like the people. And iconography is supremacy, and supremacy is used for power. So when I tell you that your God looks like this, it psychologically and subliminally it plants into your mind that this needs to be deified, because these people look like the God I told you. So if I go to Asia, they got an Asian Jesus. You know what I'm saying? If I go to any culture, he looks like the people from that culture. So when you talk about power, if I can conceptualize to you what your God is or isn't, then I have the ultimate power over you. That is the most central power I have, because you cannot grow beyond what you think God is or is not. And so when I say I conceptualize it as gaining my definition, so as I learn more, like recently, I've been reading books.
Don't do it. Don't save it for the book tip.
Okay, I will.
Go ahead. No. Do it. Pull it. Pull it.
Because I like to go to the origin of beliefs. Okay. Can you read that?
Yes, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the book of going. What's the book of going forth by day?
Okay. Now the reason that this book is important is because the Egyptians had the first cultural understanding of life after death in teaching, predating the Bible, predating any other written text. Okay. Which is why the Egyptians had hieroglyphics, right? It's hard to manipulate something if it's carved into a stone. Anybody could write something down with paper. But you see the hieroglyphs, they carved it in the stone. So if something was missing from the stone, you could say somebody's trying to hide from me.
Somebody hid it.
So it's written in the stone. And they found out, like through over times, that a lot of beliefs originated from Egyptian culture. A lot of the stories that are in this book, you might find some in your Bible. Now they don't tell you that, but they're plagiarists. And if I plagiarize a source, I should quote where I got it from. So I read this book because it goes into a lot of the concepts of if you lived a good life, you were judged and all that stuff. That comes from the Egyptian culture. If you're gonna steal from them, at least say this is their ideas.
Hey, but then who turned around and made the institutions that say you better cite everything?
Exactly. And so I understand that the Greeks took the Egyptian culture, and that they did was they understood something that was very powerful about man, and it's that triunity of us. If you look at the Sphinx in Egypt, it's a lion body, the head of a human, but it has wings of a falcon. And I think that that is so important for us because it shows that man at its primal nature is animal. It's the mind that makes us rational. Because remember, we talked about before, if in the beginning was the word. In the word Greek, it means logic or reason. So in the beginning, there was logic. Before there was logic or reason, guess what man was? Animal. So when logic and reason came, we became more superior than the animals because now we could get together, we could go hunting and say, you know what? We don't have to fear anybody because we can make weapons for warfare and knives and whatever. And so when you start to look what happens when man is not connected to reason and or logic, they still operate as if they were animal.
Yeah.
And so when I try to tell people is that the reason that the head has to be a human, and this is in the reason that we are in a patriarchal society, but we don't understand what it is to be in a matriarchal society where you could not rule unless you had the consent of the women. Like the idea that a woman could rule a nation started there. You know what I mean? So right. So we have defined or gaining our definition. And the beauty of it is that I can't get power if I don't know what my definition of power is. Because if I'm waiting for somebody to tell me that, you know, power is influence and power is in position and power comes from, you know, knowledge. And I'm like, wait a minute, no. You're telling me symptoms of power. You're telling me symptoms. I want to go to the cause and effect. Right. Because when I can get power in the sense of causation of your idea is only good insofar as it meets the current need. And you've all heard the saying, man, a good idea right now beats the perfect idea that's 10 minutes too late.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have what's called working definitions, you know, and as we work through those definitions, so this is my book, because like I said, I do believe in going to the source as much as possible. Like I hear some people tell me, like, I'm like, you read the Bible. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, did you read it in English? If you read it in English, then my concern is it's written in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. Right. So my concern is that you can hold on to the idea, but my thought is that if I'm going to be wrong, I want to be as wrong as close to the source as possible. Right. Because the last thing I will say is this, and this is where I think we tell people things, but we don't understand what they mean. We've all been to church and they say you got to discern everything, right? You got to discern the spirit. You got to discern. And I tell them, I said, what does it mean? The word discern means to rip apart. It means to tear it apart. And if you don't give me the ability to tear something apart, then you are essentially going to say to me that it's complete as it is. And I'm like, if it can't be torn apart, then I can't discern.
I like that. All right. So this is the book I'm going to be recommending. The book you recommended me. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, yeah, this is it. This is it. How We Want the World to Grow. I got the basis of it. It's showing how trauma could age you pretty much. I like this book. The quick money tip, I would say, Doc, if we were to talk about gambling, we say, hey, you know, have a plan, right? Have how much you're going to spend. Don't go over that. But, you know, like for me, I got a strategy that I like to use. You got a strategy. So the money tip is don't spend more than you can lose, and have a good strategy and ask people about it and get some good feedback. to see whether it's a stupid plan or not. I got another thing, make sure you shop at OA by KJ. It's hoodie season. We're gonna get some more stuff up there. You know what I mean? What else do I got here? Final thought. So as I wrap this up, Doc, thanks for coming on. We're gonna start doing this more often again, right? It's all about power, and then you got to think about where power comes from. So for me, you can talk about the light bill, you can talk about the sun, you can talk about where energy starts, right? But there's a power somewhere. All right. So for me, I'm trying to ascend and transcend in a lot of different ways with power. And I appreciate you coming on here and helping me with everything that you're doing. Because I know we could keep going, but I wanted to keep it an hour. We've got some football to watch. I do play fantasy. So with that, let this be the beginning of getting back popping with this Lighthouse series. I appreciate you coming on. Stay in your light. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. Doc, I'll see you on the other side here. Until next time, we out.
We out.
Peace.
Peace.